The date is October 22nd in the year 2024. My name is Anita Hecht, and I have the great pleasure and honor of interviewing Norman Clark on behalf of the Phinnip Foundation and the Garden City Oral History Project. So thank you for agreeing to participate, and we'll get started.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you decided to do this interview with us. And again, thank you for contributing to this archive of first-person stories and history. And I wanted to begin, Norman, by having you tell us a little bit about where you come from, your family of origins, anything that you want to share.
Well, my family mostly has, I used to think it had a little bit of other things in it, like Native American, but the DNA didn't come back that way. There were family legends of this. Anyway, mostly traces back to England, Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Europe, from what the DNA said.
And when were you born?
Excelsior Springs, Missouri, which is very near Kansas City. September 16th, 1941. And I had had a veterans hospital there. That's how I was involved in the war.
That's an interesting time to be born in world
Yes,
history.
yes.
Anything you want to tell us about your paternal side, your father,
Well,
how they survived?
My father's side, they had originally come over and landed in what was then called Bangor, Maine. No, it was Bangor, New Hampshire, and later it became Bangor, Maine. And they traced back to, oh gosh, just slightly before or after the American Revolution. And supposedly there's some connection somehow, I don't get into family tree too much, but with John Adams and John Quincy Adams.
Interesting. Okay. Do you know how they survived? What they did for a living?
How they survived in Maine, I don't know. They immigrated to the area of Fort Smith, Arkansas, where my great-great-grandpa worked at the fort, which was Fort Smith. And he also laid some of the limestones that make up like Garrison Avenue in Fort Smith. You know, you can still see them. And they shipped their stuff. They shipped their stuff there by steamboat. And one of the relatives had a violent disagreement because he didn't want to go to the slave area. You know, they didn't have slaves, the Clarks, except a couple that they inherited and then they freed them. It was part of somebody's will. So one branch of the family went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, because they said, we will not move to an area where there is slavery.
Mhm.
And my grandpa himself, he was a blacksmith and just a small dirt farmer, had lots of mules. And he moved into Conway, Arkansas, because there were a bunch of colleges there. It's just north of Little Rock. And he wanted his children to go to college.
He wanted his
Children to go
children
to
to go to
college.
college.
And I remember being there as a little kid. And Fort Robinson is nearby, and you could still hear the cannon going off. It was after the war, but you could still hear the artillery shells going off and so forth.
So did your father get to go to college?
Yes, he did. And then he went over after he went to a Methodist mission high school, which was in Valley View, Arkansas. And then after he got done with that, he went to SMU and graduated out of there in Dallas and graduated out of their theology school. Then he was a minister.
He was a minister with the Methodist Church?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was all kinds of places. Like when he was 17, he was already preaching. He didn't have his degree, but It was Belfar, Arkansas,
Hmm.
and I still have the Bible they gave him when he left. But he did get his degree, and he was in Louisiana. He all over the place in
Okay.
Louisiana.
So
Uh,
teaching is in your blood,
yeah,
ministry,
yeah, and then he was all over in Kansas too.
and that's how you grew up moving around
Yes, and Missouri.
in Missouri. What about your mother's family? Anything you want to share about?
They're a little bit more. Their name was Gates, and they're related somehow to John Nance Garner, who was a vice president at one time or another. Uh, they were more Irish, or maybe Northern Irish, and they immigrated. If you trace it back far enough, uh, it actually traces back through the grandma that I thought was part Indian, but the DNA didn't prove it. But she traces clear back to
Mm, wow.
Jamestown Colony.
Mhm. So you come onto the scene in 1941.
Yes.
Do you have siblings? Are you?
No, I was an only child because my mom had epilepsy really bad, and they thought, well, having me didn't really help matters much. And epilepsy is somewhat hereditary, and they were just afraid to have any more children
Yeah. So that meant you got a lot of attention.
or spoiled, or that didn't learn how to share very well, or something.
What do you think shaped you in your childhood and youth? What kind of influences were there in your life? Education, I imagine.
Yeah, I was often around adults.
Mhm.
Usually where we lived, there were no kids.
Mm.
Because like when we lived in Illinois, there were no kids. The church was downtown,
Mm.
0 kids. When we lived in Emporia, Kansas, which is in eastern Kansas, there was one kid in the block, but he went to the other snobby elementary school, and he wouldn't talk to me because I went to the school where all the African American kids were.
So you were exposed to people who were different than you at a young age?
Yes,
Mm.
yes, I was, and I remember something I did. I did when I was in Emporia. I did some kind of presentation for the youth group, and they had me take it over to the. It was an AME church and present over there, and I noticed that many of them were quite mixed. Just like the Thomas Jefferson story, and they
Mhm,
found he
mhm,
had all these relatives.
mhm. Interesting. You went to public schools?
Yes,
And when did you graduate from high school?
1957, and they had allowed me to start at age 4. So I was kind of like always the youngest one. I actually started college when I was 17.
And what did you want to study?
I thought it was going to be biology and probably a medical degree. I was really good at biology. And the first college I went to was Centenary College in Shreveport, Louisiana, and it's the oldest college west of the Mississippi River, and it's still in existence. Uh, I did pretty well. Uh, then I went over to SMU, and when they started trying to make me memorize a formula for aspirin, it covered 2 pages. You couldn't look on your cell phone. None of that stuff existed. And I thought, this is a bunch of baloney. I can't remember all this. My real love is history. So I came to Fort Hays, which is in Kansas and about 140 miles off to the northeast, and I got my master's in history.
I see.
And I've become quite the nut on everybody's local history and little interesting facts. You'll see me come up with some of these, because in teaching, if you could get a middle schooler hooked on some of your facts, then they'd pay attention to the harder stuff. And I've had some of them, they've remembered some of my jokes from 50 years ago. That's pretty good. It must have left an impression on them.
So you couldn't remember the formula
They,
for a pharmaceutical
Ashford, but
for
they
aspirin,
can
but you
remember the
remember
joke.
history.
Yes, yes.
And you must have a. What do you love about history?
Uh, some of the quirkiest things happened back then that it's part of the main story. But like I'm gonna tell you several of these today, it's part of the main story, but it may be things that you won't remember much about. Uh, uh, you won't remember all the facts, but you'll remember the stories forever. There, I said that right now.
Right. So bring me to Garden City. How did you end up here?
All right. I had been in Victoria. I was a total outcast. That means nothing to you, but it's just east of Hayes. It's Volga Germans, and
Volga Germans, okay.
yeah, uh, and they have been here 150 years. But there were maybe a family or two that weren't Catholic, and I was a real outcast. And but they offered me the job, and I took it. And I was a very boring teacher back then. You know, I'd stand up there clinging to the podium, shaking, and I hadn't learned how to tell funny stories yet. But once I got to middle school in Garden City, which was 5 years later, I had, and I went to Atwood, which is straight north of here after Victoria. The reason we left Victoria, there was kind of pressure on us. Like one priest came by to school and said, "I know your wife's pregnant because she wouldn't have married you for any other reason." And, you know, people were throwing.
Because
She had an aunt who threw a whole bottle of holy water on the rooms.
because you weren't Catholic?
That's right.
Wow.
And then we moved to Atwood, which was mixed ethnically. It had a lot of Czechoslovakians, which was kind of interesting, and they were mostly Catholic. And learning how to pronounce their names was
Tricky.
rather interesting. Chivital is pronounced Quaddle, for example. But we liked that town, but it had a doctor who was 80 years old, over 80, still practicing, but you didn't want to go to him, although he's probably the best one. It had one who went to our church. His wife would, the Methodist, his wife would come to church all bruised, and he beat her up all the time. And then the third doctor graduated last in his medical class because we had some friends and he had to circumcise their boy twice
Oh,
before he got it right.
oh.
So my wife said, "We are leaving." And so we came to Garden City.
What
and
did
we were
you
there 50 years.
did you know anything about Garden City before you got here?
My wife had relatives here,
Okay.
and she had visited here as a kid, but not much.
And what
I-
was it like? What was the city like in 1969?
Fairly white. All right. Uh, uh, some Mexicans, but they in general had pretty well adapted to the culture.
And they had come earlier
They
to
had
work?
come. This takes you back to they had come. They had come. What brought them here? They heard there was something about the Santa Fe, and they thought that meant Holy Faith. They didn't realize it was a railroad, and they wanted to go work on the Santa Fe, and they thought they were going on perhaps a expedition to convert people, or they found out that they were railroad workers, and that didn't go over too good. And there was prejudice. I didn't see it, but I have studied this. Finney County Historical Society has records of this. like in the early day history of Garden City, St. Mary's Church was the original church. The Mexicans were not even allowed in there. If it was a nice priest, he might give them communion at the door.
Hmm.
And then a little later, this was before my time, but this is for somebody who I invited to come to my class and talk. His name was Pete Sandoval. He was an altar boy at St. Mary's, and his grandmother had brought her black friend. The priest stopped the mass, went down, picked the lady up by the arm, and marched her out the door and said, "Don't you ever come back."
Wow.
Now, that has greatly changed. But even at St. Mary's School in the early days, you were not to cross state. That was against the rules.
Because
They didn't believe in Mexican people and white people getting married. Now, 2/3 of my grandkids come from that situation currently.
so that changed quite a bit in your
Yes, yes, I did see it change.
um anything you want to share about maybe some of the less well-known stories that you learned about Garden City history? You taught Garden City and Kansas
Yeah, I
history.
taught Garden City history. I even had a class in it, and I taught U.S. history. I taught Kansas history. Uh, I taught government.
This was all at the middle school?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. It was. And here is one. The Fitty County Historical Society can verify this, but one of the founders of Garden City was Buffalo Jones, and the, you can look him up on the internet. And there's lots of things about him, but here are two stories that would always grab the kids' attention. When he helped save the buffalo, and he went from killing buffalo to saving them, and I'm not going to get into all that. But the way he got his first buffalo, he would go down the Texas Panhandle where there were still some buffalo, and he would pick up calves. And the first time he did it, he came back empty-handed. The wolves ate all the calves. So he learned that wolves don't like human smell. So next time he went back, first calf he tied up, he like took his shirt off. Second one, he took his pants off. Third one, his hat. Pretty soon he had nothing on, which would have been kind of embarrassing, but all the thing watching was buffalo. And when he went back after the calves, they were all there.
Interesting story.
That had happened. And he became first game warden in Yellowstone National Park. Uh, he was appointed that by Teddy Roosevelt, which is entirely another story. He also helped found Garden City, which is another story. But the funniest story in Yellowstone, and if you get on the Finney County Historical Society website, you can find this. He actually, there's an old time video. It was taken off of 16 millimeter stuff, I think, and digitalized. But it shows him, it's a very short episode. He grabs a bear by one leg, hangs him over a branch, and paddles the bear's butt. And he thought he was teaching the bear, then he let the bear loose, that the bear, he was teaching the bear, he would go tell all his friends not to steal picnic baskets. Now, that's stupid, but you'll never forget a story
Right.
like that. All right.
Yeah.
And if you get back to Garden City, early stories, these came from Pete Sandoval and Rudy Valenzuela. I would always have guest speakers if they had something to do with our topic. All right, we were talking about Pancho Villa. I had Rudy Valenzuela come to my class. He was right at 100 years old. Pancho Villa attacked his school in Chihuahua City, and he remembered it.
Wow.
And he told the kids a thing I'll never forget. He said, "You know what?" He was talking to eighth graders. He said, "You know what? I never thought I would move to the United States and be telling you in English about Pancho Villa attacking my school. Then he said, look what happened. And he became a very famous photographer here, if you look it up. Very famous. And on Pete Sandoval, when he came back from World War II, they had drafted him and found out he wasn't a citizen. They just made him a citizen. Uh, and uh, and when he came back with his uniform on, as long as he had his uniform on, they would let him into the restaurants, the movies, everywhere. But once he took his uniform off, then segregation ensued. And he had to get his meal at the back door of the restaurant. He had to get his hair cut after they pulled down the shades and then let him in the back door. State Theater downtown, which is still there, he and the black people had to sit in the balcony. They were not allowed down on the main floor. Then when it came time to integrate, he and his wife, because they were rather light complected, they let them pioneer and sit downstairs to see if that would create a riot. And then it didn't, and so things progressed.
When you arrived, were things integrated?
Yes, but there was prejudice. For example, Pete Sandoval, this guy, he always came in and talked to my kids. He was a serviceman. It's serious by that time. And he talked about like being called to Leota for a serious service. And the minute he hit the city limits, a cop car just started following him everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
and in Leota at that time, and that was going on in 1969, the Mexican kids had to sit at the back of the classroom.
Not in the back of your classroom.
No, in Leota.
Okay.
So there was still elements of this going on.
Yeah.
And when I asked the principal at the time, I said, I want to ask Pete Sandoval up. And the principal at that time said, no, I will not have somebody coming up here screaming Viva La Raza. The Cesar Chavez stuff had just happened.
The Cesar Chavez. Yeah.
We changed principals, and then the new principal says, sure, bring him up, let him come. Okay.
But you were somewhat open-minded already.
Yes.
And where did that come from? Do you think that was a result of having been schooled with African American kids or being part of a Methodist community? How did you?
I'm not quite sure. I had to get rid of my prejudices. Like the student's name is Aaron Austin. I had him in class, and he is now. He used to work for Wichita. I think he works for Wichita State still.
Tell me his name again.
Aaron Austin. And his mom was the first black mayor of Garden City. But when I got him in class, I was slightly prejudiced. But the longer I had him, the less prejudice I had. He truly helped me work through this. He was one regular nice kid. So I had some students that the more I talked to them, the less prejudiced I got. And he knows that. I mean, I thanked him for that.
Wow. So it's really that human to human interaction you think
Exactly.
changed you.
Yes.
You didn't just teach students, but they influenced you.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me more about the history that you learned as you got here. Also, how the city started to change while you were here. You came in '69, so
yeah. All right. Two things. This one comes from this one comes from Pete Sandoval too. He said that one year he volunteered to be the Santa Claus at a certain school here, and he showed up at the school. The school still exists. It's in a different building, and he told the principal. He said, I'm here, I'm in my Santa Claus suit. And the principal said, you go sit in my office, I'll call for you. And guess what? Principal never called for him. Finally, Pete came out and said, what happened? Everybody's leaving. So there was elements of problems here.
Couldn't have a Mexican Santa Claus.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Santa Claus has to be white.
Mm-hmm. Talk me through the changes. Well, there was one other thing I wanted to ask you about. You know a lot of the airport history, I think. Is that something that you would like to share a little bit of history about?
There.
The airport?
You sure will. I'll mention this first and then I'll go into the airport. Well, into the coming of IBP and then the airport.
Okay.
Right? This happened to me in the Methodist Church once. We've always had Hispanic members there. Because they had their own church and they merged in with ours. And as long as I can remember, there were always Hispanic people there and still are. But our daughters were kind of little and we start squeezing into this pew one Sunday morning. And my daughter, Amy, I am not sitting by that dark person. And they were Mexican. And my daughter Jenny felt about the same way. Well, Amy ended up marrying a Hispanic guy, right? So anyway, and let's see.
She changed.
Yeah, I want to mention the car engine tombstone.
Oh yeah.
It's out in Valley View Cemetery. It's the only car engine tombstone in the entire United States.
And what's the story there?
I'm going to tell it to you. And the person's name was Mitchell Ronalds. And the story is, this was before my time, but you can go out to the cemetery and see it now. It was a dark and stormy night, you know, and his folks heated was cold, and they told him to go get a load of coal, and he had to cross the railroad tracks to do it. And he got his load of coal. It was a dark and stormy night, and this train hit him and he was killed. And they kind of blamed the car engine, because I think this is supposedly the story was that it stalled on the train tracks, and he couldn't get out of the way. So they took that car engine out and put it up as his tombstone. And it's still up in the cemetery. It's been all refurbished and everything.
Yeah.
But that's the only one in the United States, and that's rather unique.
I wanted you also to tell this story. I mean, these are stories I imagine you taught your students.
Yes.
But you talked about something with me about the first use of fingerprints. And
Yes.
The first use of aerial reconnaissance right here.
Yes.
Tell me about
All right. There was a gang around here, and you can look them up on the internet. They were named the Flegel Gang.
Flegel.
And they robbed banks. And they lived in this county out in the country. And some of the Flegel family were very good people who went to church. But then there was this other branch of the family, although Mrs. Flegel supposedly originally taught of this branch, taught Sunday school at the I think it's Pleasant Valley Church out on the county line. It's on the Scott County County line. Anyway, they got into robbing banks. And they robbed First National Bank of Lamar, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And they made off with a whole bunch of money and shot a whole bunch of people. And the government got really interested in catching them. And one of them left their vehicle was found, and one of them left a fingerprint on there. And that was the first use of fingerprints to track down. There wasn't a national base, but they could take that fingerprint and then prove, once they caught these people, it belonged to them. And also they put an airplane up. And that was the first use of aerial reconnaissance, trying to figure out where these people ran off to. and it's quite a story. I won't bore you with the whole thing, but one of them was actually captured in Branson, Missouri. One of them was captured in Colorado. And you just look up the story, but it's quite a story. And if you ever heard of Little Abner comic book, Evil Eye Flegel.
He was what?
Evil Eye Flegel is in there.
Oh.
That's the Flegel name.
Oh.
Yep,
So this was
30s.
the 1930s. Okay.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
So did you teach that story?
Yes, I did.
Yes,
Yes,
you
I
did.
did. Yes,
There
I
was
did.
one
Teach
other.
that. Yes, I did teach that story.
Can you tell me the story about Old Bill?
Okay, Old Bill. Embalming had just been invented.
Bombing.
Embalming of
Embalming.
bodies. Embalming of bodies. And this guy committed suicide,
Mm-hmm.
and they unloaded it on a train. He slit his throat, and they unloaded his body in Garden City, and nobody claimed it. So Garnan Funeral Home, they're still in existence. It's not the location they're in now, but nobody would claim the body, so they embalmed him. And it used to be quite fun in the late 30s. If you were in town, you'd go by Garnan Funeral Home, and you'd ask to see Old Bill, and they had him on a little dolly, and they'd wheel him out. You could see how he was doing. And I've talked to people who remember doing that. That would be a big no-no now.
So he stayed in the funeral home
Yes,
for a long time?
yes, he stayed there for probably 14, 15 years. And I don't know what would have happened, but when they had the fire at Garnan's, that's in the parking lot across from now what is First Christian Church, he got cremated.
Along with everything else.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now I got into having my students interview old people. That was the first thing I did. We'd go to old folks' homes, and they would work on a list of questions. You know, about what do you remember about the Dust Bowl? What do you remember about this? What do you remember about that? Why'd your parents move? You know, kind of like what you're into. And the thing that would blow the minds of the middle school boys when they were interviewing these old people, guess where the ladies stored their hankies and their Kleenex and money? Yeah, in their bra. And middle school boys just, why was that lady fishing her arm up? So, you know, they just about flipped out. And the local historical society has 60 or 70 of those interviews.
Wow, that's good to know.
Yeah, and to help preserve history. Then I got into doing National History Day, which is held in Washington, D.C. And you have a little bit of pictures of that and everything.
Mhm.
And
So you took kids to Washington, D.C.?
yeah, and the local school board would pay for the flight. They would pay for the meals at the University of Maryland, because that's where the event was held. And they would pay for the lodging, but they wouldn't pay for the tours. So that's when I started going to Caverly. I said, Caverly, we've got all these kids going to Washington, D.C. I went 5 times.
And so they helped, the Finney Foundation helped to fund
Helped
the
to
tours.
get them tours to around Washington, Arlington National Cemetery,
That's interesting.
Mount Vernon, you name it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Caverly was very generous with that.
That's wonderful.
And that was so wonderful. And I kind of miss doing that, and I have more students. I almost they have a big old room at the middle school named the Clark Courtyard, and they almost named the middle school after me. I was the runner-up, but I have more kids who've written me, Mr. Clark, you're the reason I like history.
Wow,
And I have a stack of those at home.
that's fantastic.
And I really do. Okay, the Clutter case. These are more things that I. Okay, of course, the Clutter case occurred before I arrived in Garden City, but I knew
That's better known, you think, as a story?
I was in high school.
Okay.
It's the In Cold Blood, Truman Capote. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was the first time he used historical fiction where it was mostly historical but somewhat fictional. And I had a lot of people here, a lot of students who their grandparents were on the jury, their grandparents were living here when this happened. I'd have them bring whatever they could from home. I got a list of pallbearers. I actually had one kid try to bring me the autopsy pictures once. I said, I'm not passing those around.
So the Clutter was they were a family that were murdered.
Yeah, and they were quite prominent,
Mhm.
and they became quite prominent because of this book in Cold Blood that was a New York Times bestseller.
I think,
Now,
didn't you tell me Caverly's father was on the jury?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Mhm.
One thing about that kind of shocked me more than anything. I had one kid who that they found the bodies, and the kids just had all kinds of stories about this.
Yeah.
I had another kid who, oh yeah, my music teacher was the last one to see her alive, and so forth.
So you had your kids go out and do
And
some
bring
research.
back
Oh,
stuff to me, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And one thing, Herb built the First United Methodist Church, which is down here on the main corner of Maine and Kansas. It's very close to where we're located, but just north up there. And he was chair of the building committee. And when he got murdered, they had taken the position about, well, we're never doing a memorial in this church. Because probably Jewish people do this, Christian people do it. You leave memorials and everything in the whole church is just a big memorial. Well, they broke the rule with Herb. That rose window that you see from Maine and Kansas is dedicated to the Clutter family, and it stands for the 12 apostles. And there's a plaque up in that church and a small display honoring the Clutter family. They thought, and by the way, when their murder was announced at church, everybody started crying. The minister didn't know what to do, and he just stopped the service and said, "Well, you all just go home and pray." And their funeral was the biggest funeral that was in that church until recent times.
Hmm.
And they're not buried in Holcomb. They lived in Holcomb. Holcomb's the biggest town in the United States. It's 2,000 some. Doesn't have a cemetery.
So where are they buried?
Bellevue, Garden City.
Garden City.
If you're interested, it's out there.
Right. Interesting.
Okay.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you to talk about too was sort of the changes that started to happen in Garden City and also how that impacted your classroom.
Right. All right. I was here when IBP was going to come. It was called IBP then.
What year was that?
I couldn't tell you, and I didn't look it up. I'm sure you could look
Well,
it up.
yeah.
I want to say the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that when they were going to open up IBP, the person who was going to manage the plant, they actually went out and burned a cross on his lawn.
Who burned the cross?
People who didn't want to see IBP created because they thought a bunch of foreigners were going to come in here and,
But the city fathers or the
were
power
pretty
that
supportive.
wanted the industry as a way to.
That they thought it would. Garden City's always been interested in trying to be progressive and have industry and so forth. And one of my favorite stories from this, the Vietnamese were beginning to come. By the way, we heard the dog and cat stories. They ate them. They ate them. They ate them.
You heard those stories back then?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
And some people were convinced. Probably still are. I was teaching school, and some of the Vietnamese had been here a while. And I got this new kid, and it was around Christmas time. And he was the nicest kid. But I saw him crying out in the hall. and and if I got the story out of him, it had to be translated partially. He had just arrived in America, and he wanted the Americans to like him. It was Christmas time, so they told him to go up to all the American kids and go like this, look them like straight in the face and say Merry Christmas.
His classmates told him that?
Some of the Vietnamese kids did.
Oh.
And he was just in tears when he found that out. When we finally untangled, he was crying in my room. He was so embarrassed. The Vietnamese kids who caused all of this were suspended.
Mhm.
But
So were there often tensions between newcomers and
yes,
old comers
yes,
within the
they,
same ethnic group?
there's a ditch that runs through Garden City. I don't know whether you've noticed it.
A
But
ditch.
if you go north, of Main Street, it's right where Main Street kind of turns a little bit. There's a drainage ditch, and one day, the Mexicans who were already here passed the word after school the ditch. We're going to beat the newcomers up, the newcoming Mexicans. We don't want anything to do with them.
Did that come to pass?
I think so.
Huh.
I did turn it into the office and everything, and the police were there, and it was a big mess. Of course, it was off the school grounds. But yeah, even when I was toward the end of my experience, we began to get to Somalians, and oh my gosh, and they didn't want to be buried. They didn't want to be buried in our cemetery. They wanted their own cemetery. Because they were Muslim and we were Christian. Now, Garden City had segregation in their cemetery. There was a Mexican section and a white section, and that's now broken down and no longer in existence. But some of the Somalians were very bullheaded. Well, they were trying to stick to their culture,
Right.
you know, and their clothes looked funny. And
So you had to manage some of these differences inside your class?
yes, I did. Yes,
And
I did.
how did that work or not work?
Uh,
What did you do? Or what did you find effective?
I got one kid. He was one of the first ones who came, and he testified to the other kids about how weird he felt. He didn't wear the funny clothes. He quit that. But he said that he remembered being in Minnesota and all the people staring at his funny clothes. And then he remembered getting off the plane here, I think, people staring at his funny clothes and ridiculing him. And he said he just wanted to fit in and learn how to adapt to this culture. But even as late as last spring of this year, we drove into Garden City on business. I had a medical appointment, and we were up on Mary Street, and there were cops everywhere. And there were a bunch of Somalians in that blow-up assembly hall that's on Mary Street. And they were celebrating the start of one of their feast days, and they were all dressed in the original Somalian outfits. And the police were watching this very carefully, and there was no incident. But and I remember one girl, she shall remain nameless. I was subbing, I think, when she first came here, because I continued to sub after I quit teaching. And she just wanted to be an American kid. She was Somalian. By the time I left town, she was wearing the raggy jeans. She had her hair fixed like an African American from the United States, or at least non-Muslim. I'm sure her parents thought all kinds of things, but somehow they had prevented her to do this. And all she wanted to do is just fit in with the other kids and become an American. And I admired her so much. I know she was going through holy heck at home, but
Yeah, talk a little bit also. I mean, you talked a little bit about some of the more negative stories in terms of kids not treating each other well or getting in trouble. What were some of the positive things that you experienced with
when other
students
kids
with
would,
this?
like this one boy would testify, hey, I just, I just want to become an American. This girl and her actions, and the way the kids would help each other, and in general in the classroom they weren't that nasty. And if they had been, I know where they were going.
What
It
did
was
you
called
do?
the office now, because I wouldn't put up with stuff like
Mhm.
that. And I think the German Mennonites were picked on pretty badly because they dress funny and they come out of Mexico.
The
But
Mennonites. Tell me.
no, they originally came out of the Ukraine, but then they went to Canada. And then at time of World War One, they were told you had to speak English in your schools or else. And so they decided to go to Mexico because Mexico wasn't going to require that. And there's 20,000 of them in Southwest Kansas. It's the ones you see in the stores with the little dresses and so forth.
And so there was a population of Mennonites here
Yes,
that came to
yes,
yours.
and some of them just wanted to totally blend in, and some of them just wanted to keep the traditions. One thing that happened, uh, and this is a true story. Two of my students were to get married, and I knew who they were. I won't name names, but the elders of the Mennonite church out of a town south of here came to her house and said there will be no wedding. And she said, "Why not?" They said, "You were seen in Walmart with a T-shirt on."
With a
And
t-shirt.
that really did happen. And they had to call someplace in Texas where there's a bunch of German Mennonites too. And they finally found a pastor that would come up here and marry him anyway.
Hmm.
But, you know, and I would take interest in all kids. We would get invited sometimes to their houses for meals and, you know, talk to the parents, understand where the parents were coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still Facebook friends with a few of them.
You said when you came in today that there's a student who graduated from Harvard that you had.
Yes,
Who was that? And
his name is Tret Boo,
uh-huh.
and his dad worked at IBP, and his dad was injured, and IBP wouldn't pay proper workman's comp. I think they would have to now, but he went to Wichita so his dad could get better medical care. And then I think, well, his dad died. No, his dad died, and then there was more family in Wichita. But he ended up, you know, overcoming all this and graduating from Harvard.
That's a success story.
Yeah,
Wow.
and one of the big Voga German foods is Burox, which is basically cabbage and meat and bread around it.
What's it called?
Burock,
Mm-hmm.
Bierock,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll see signs uh, around about Burox if you know where to go.
Mm.
But anyway, the guy lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and he actually remembered eating them in Garden City, and he said, "Send me the recipes. They don't know what I'm talking about." He said, "I love those things,"
Mm.
and we have some really unique restaurants here. There's a real unique Vietnamese restaurant that traces way back. There's a real unique Thai restaurant, Thai Arlong, that traces way back. It's Thai food. And there's a lot of this. And
That's
Garden City's accepted a lot of groups and just let them blend in. Now, I know times have changed. When I first came, beer rocks were always on the menu at lunch and kids loved them. As we got the Oriental people, they started serving Oriental food instead. That was more popular because the beer rocks had ended up in the trash and the teachers would go over there, no, don't throw those away. I want to take them home.
So the actual school lunches changed as the
Yes, and to
demographics
adapt
changed?
to the cultures.
Uh-huh.
Yes, they did.
How did you?
And Garden City has quite an ESL program.
Mhm.
And they had a newcomers class for the ones that had just come. And then they would farm them out into some classes where you would have an interpreter go with you, but you wouldn't need to know English quite so much. Garden City's worked really hard on this.
Mhm.
All kinds of kids.
So that's positive.
Yes, there are positive things.
Did the content of your teaching change with the demographic changes? Did you teach other kinds of history?
Well, here's what I did was, uh, this- I hope it didn't get me in trouble. But I did some pretty crazy things in my day. Uh, Toward the end, I'd say, okay, there's four corners in this room. Okay. If you yourself were the immigrant, that corner. If it was your parents, that corner. If it was your grandparents, that corner. And you who go back further than that, it's this corner. Guess which corner almost had nobody?
Those who went back the furthest?
And Garden City's gone, like when I came the town had Hispanic people, but that was about it. And it's gone to now Garden City High. When I left, I think they had people from 50 different countries going to school there. They were born in 50 different countries. And they try really hard to adapt to all of this. And they work really hard trying to help these people. And I admire that.
Mm-hmm. Did you also teach about the history of racism or any kinds of prejudice? I know you had said you took kids sometimes to the Japanese internment camp in
Yeah.
Colorado.
Yeah, it's in Colorado. It's our newest national park. It's a Manchi National Park, and it's near Grenada, Colorado. And it was Japanese internment camp where Japanese Americans were held behind bars. And there's still remnants of these families around. You know, they
So you taught some of that.
yeah,
as well.
yes, I did. And we did a lot of simulations, the old-fashioned ones with books before computers. But we had one about the Oregon Trail. That was a good one. We had one about a jury case, and I asked a real judge to come in and preside. And after the day was over, he said, "How do you live through this?" With middle school kids. But we would talk about prejudice and how unfair it was and how it just wasn't right. And I at the time I was still teaching at the time of the Parkland shootings in Florida, and I had a room right by the front door. You should have seen how panicked those kids were. But we had it all figured out. We locked the door, we stuck a chair under the door. We had already figured out how thick the glass was. There wasn't too much glass, but we got the kids away from all glass and totally quiet. And they took this very seriously.
Were you ever in any very dangerous situations in school?
A few close calls, but most of the time it was just a close call.
Of what kind?
That maybe there had been a shooter in the area,
I see.
and they wanted to make sure that they didn't go into school and try to take some kids hostage. Now, two things I want to really get into that I haven't yet is 9/11
Yep.
and the day after Trump was inaugurated. And on 9/11, I was teaching middle school. And one of the people I'm gonna go visit tomorrow, he came over to my room. He said, "Mr. Clark, turn on your TV." And we flat watched it. You
Watched
know,
it in real time
we watched it in real time. And then
with your students.
with my students, and they were terrified, obviously. And then they forced 3 planes down in Garden City when they grounded all planes, because Garden City has a big old airport. It traces back to World War II. That's another story.
We're going to talk about
Yeah,
that too.
that's another story. But it has tremendous runways and currently has direct flights to Dallas, Fort Worth. But anyway, back then, they told 3 planes to land in Garden City. 2 of them were just medium-sized planes and probably didn't have terrorists. But the big one was an Air Canada. And it had taken off from Logan, 1 gate down, 5 minutes from when the one went that tried to do the thing in Pennsylvania.
They tried to hit the Pentagon. Is it?
Yeah, they were, yeah. Of all of these planes, the one that did the Pentagon, the one that was supposed to do the White House, all kinds of things. So here's what actually happened, and when I'm done here, I'm going to visit the wife, and he may be over there. I think he's retired too, but I'm going to visit Kim Steele, and her husband was on duty to guard these planes, and he heard this from the pilot of the big Air Canada plane. All right, this came straight from somebody who heard the pilot say it. He said, first time, the pilot said, proceeding to Denver. And air traffic control came on and said, maybe you didn't understand me, but I said land in Garden City, Kansas. And he said, proceeding to Denver, the pilot did. Then air traffic control said, we have the jets up. It's a national emergency. If you don't land in Garden City, Kansas, we're going to blow that plane to smithereens. And the guy said, landing in Garden City, Kansas, and did it. And because that kind of happened right over our town.
Wow.
And then they hauled them all to the high school, bussed them, and they provided them with a meal, and they talked to them and tried to set up lodging for them, and told them what their options were. Trains. I believe trains were still running, and we do have a train service here still that goes east and west. Buses were still running, but they told these people what their options were, and they tried to set them all up for the night. Some of them had to go to Liberal, some of them had to go to Dodge. But by the time they opened the airspace all up, there was most of them had found other transportation. There was 40 or 50 of them left. But if you go out to the airport, they have pictures of all this and the story of all this still hanging at the Garden City Airport. It's very interesting.
It is interesting.
And then,
what can you tell me a little bit about the history of the airport, the airfields here? Because I know that
it was a World War II airport.
Okay.
And they built one here. They built one in Great Bend. These are all Kansas towns that you don't know too much about, but Liberal's another one. And another one was built near Hayes at a place called Walker. And they were to train the pilots to take the bombs to unload on the Japanese. Okay, and I think at the Garden City Airport, they literally trained the pilots that did take the bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was from the Garden City Airport. And so.
I think you also mentioned something about the only domestic bombing happened in
Yeah.
Oklahoma. What
Well,
was
yeah,
that?
one night, uh, it was dark and stormy night.
Another one.
Yeah, yeah. You got, this really did happen in World War II. Uh, this plane, I think, had taken off from Liberal and they got lost. They were supposed to drop their bombs over a bombing range. And there were a lot of bombing ranges set up by Salina, by western Kansas and the Oklahoma Panhandle and so forth. They dropped the bombs on Boise City, Oklahoma. One of them landed on the courthouse square. It's the county seat.
This was an accident, of course.
Yeah, they actually bombed the U.S. It was the only U.S. town bombed in World War II by our own people. Now, fortunately, there weren't a bunch of casualties, but and they finally got all this untangled. But it was the only U.S. town.
Wow.
Now, by the way, some of the Japanese had air bombs. You can look it up, and they were on balloons. And some of them came in as far as Nebraska and Kansas, if you look into it, before they came down. But that's kind of another topic.
Another little tidbit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's true.
Wow.
All right, I had retired, but I was still just student teaching. I don't mean that I'm sounding like somebody else. I got the wrong word. I was still substitute teaching. And when this happened, and it was the day after Trump got elected.
2016.
That they wanted to do it before the election, but they thought that would be a little too obvious. So a local terrorist group had formed. Some of them were from Liberal, one of them was from Wright, Kansas, and so forth. And fortunately, the FBI was able to infiltrate. Okay. And what they were going to do, and they got caught just in the nick of time. They were going to bomb this apartment complex in Northwest Garden City. It was where most of the Somalians lived. And there was a nearby public school that would have taken that out. There would have been thousands of casualties. More white folks, Mexican folks, than Somalians. And a lot of people totally uninvolved, but they just didn't want the Somalians around. They just wanted them out. So they were arrested just before the plot happened. They already had the stuff loaded up to do it.
Wow.
And they knew where they were going to put the bombs, and they knew when they were going to do it. And it was just barely stopped. It was on national news.
Wow. And you sort of tied it to the first Trump presidency. Did you feel that?
Yes, they intended, because he said we had too many foreigners around, and they believed him, and they just decided to just kill all these people.
Wow. Were you surprised when you heard about it?
I can't talk politics, but no, because some people just feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
they do.
Well, it's teachers like you who help reverse that tide, I think, by teaching tolerance. Tell me a little bit about the school system. Did you feel supported? Was there, as all of these demographic changes were happening, how did the administration and policymakers respond?
Just pretty well. And if you look at the symbol of Garden City, it shows kind of a yucca cactus, but it's many different colors, and that represents all the people who are here.
Mm.
You know, from Lord knows where, including the Burmese, who I haven't even talked about. But, you know, they were another element.
Tell me a little bit about the Burmese.
They were pretty lost in this culture.
They were refugees from war.
Burma,
Mm-hmm.
Myanmar, I think is the new word for it. And there were a bunch of people coming in from Central African Republic too. And the worst thing they had trouble all adapting to was the winters here. you'd see them running around on the ice and snow in these tropical outfits, but that began to change pretty quick and they began to adapt.
Mhm.
And I was in a classroom, a welcome classroom once with a Somalian girl, and she knew more Somalian than they knew Spanish because they'd spoken to the kids in Somalian, they'd spoken to them in Spanish, they'd spoken to them in the Miramar language. The Garden City schools tried to keep their bases all covered, taking care of these kids. Now, there's some people that think those funds are a waste of money. It should just be eliminated.
What do you think?
No, because because most of the people who are coming now really want to adapt to this culture and not just use it.
Mhm.
They truly do.
They want to.
They want to be a productive citizen in this country.
Right.
And I'll tell you something that happened just before I retired. And I did say this, and the kids were kind of like, this kid would come back from lunch. I don't want to be in this country. This is the awfulest country on earth. I don't know why I'm here. I hate this place. And I said, well, excuse me for saying this. I know it's not your fault you're here because your parents brought you. But I said, I wouldn't even live in a country I didn't want to be in. I said, that's my opinion. And I did say that.
Mm.
And, he'd do it again and I'd say it again.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know what he was trying to prove, but you don't really see too much of that.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them really want to succeed in this country and better their families.
Yeah.
And become productive people in the society.
And
They
some are
do not want to just live off the system.
right. And some of them are coming from very difficult circumstances, right?
Yes, they
Most
are.
people don't leave their country because they're having a great time here.
Right, like some of the people from Central America are fleeing because of gangs.
I was going to ask you about gangs. Was there any-
Gangs is a problem that Garden City has a real active police force that has a gang unit,
Mhm.
and they have drug sniffing dogs, and they try really hard to keep a handle on this. I wouldn't say it doesn't exist. It does exist,
Mhm.
but one kid I know of, he was friends with my grandson. He's half black, half El Salvadoran, and he adapted to the culture. He was a star football player last year for Garden City High, one of the quarterbacks. He just wanted to fit into this culture. And I know he knew about gangs. I know he did. But he just stayed away from them. He wanted to be a productive part of this culture and still does.
What do you think appeals to kids about joining a gang?
If they feel too much like an outcast,
Mm.
they'll figure, maybe this gang's got my back, but that's not exactly the truth.
Mhm.
Uh,
It's a place to belong, though.
it's a place to belong.
Mhm.
It's a place to have people who are friends.
Mhm.
Now, I saw things really change, and these are positive changes too. This goes back just a little. But when I first came, I taught honors classes, some, not entirely, because I don't believe in just being a teacher of honors kids. Teachers of honors kids are spoiled. That's my opinion. Well, and I'm sure they would disagree with me completely. And I'm sure some of them, they may pick a fight if they ever see this, but they kind of got it made. I think you need to work with everybody. But anyway, I had some honors kids, and in the beginning, uh, those classes were pretty much white, a Hispanic or two. By the time I left, I remember we ran a survey in the honors class. Uh, half the kids were mixed. A fourth of the kids were white. A fourth of the kids were other races. And the mixed kids were on top of the heap.
Hmm.
And I consider that kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a grandson confirmed at the Methodist Church here, and his confirmation class was getting very mixed. Not totally mixed, but there was actually an Asian girl, and there were several mixed Hispanic. But the Asian girl was real interesting. They wanted her to do this because they thought this was a part of America, and they wanted her to get like the American. That was their excuse. I checked into it. They said, well, this is part of America. We want to fit in. And I said, so this wasn't their religious beliefs? No. They wanted her to fit into the American culture and be part of the things here. And,
Mm-hmm.
it struck me as rather odd, but the longer I think about it, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
What about the school system? Have you had to work to advocate for certain changes? Do you feel like, I know you had mentioned there's a new superintendent.
I think he did go somewhere else. You need a superintendent who really understands what they're dealing with here. And it takes a special superintendent to do this. And they've had some great ones.
And what makes it, what are the policies that you think work, and what is this one trying to do that you don't think will work?
You need a newcomers class for the freshmen, and there are still newcomers coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are. And then you need a transition class. And then you need to put them out in the regular classrooms where they don't have to know so much English, but sometimes with a para who checks on them. And then they can be put in the regular classroom and then go back at the end of the day and check with the para about problems they're having, and the para could come check with the teacher if they don't understand, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And
And yes, I do know some stuff in Spanish I'm not supposed to know. But I know how to catch them if they're doing something really bad.
uh-huh. What about other services? So inside the school, you'd like to see these kinds of classes. Have there been other kinds of
Yes,
community
Catholic
services?
Catholic social services do really good, and I think there is an Asian one unless it closed. It was over there by the railroad tracks. It was to help Asian people, and then there's for medical services. There's they don't call it anymore. I think they call it Genesis, but it used to be Mexican American Ministries, and any low income person, immigrant, whatever, can go there and get services
Hmm.
for free if they can't pay.
Right. Anything else about the school system, your work in the school system, something you want to share about the values you hope new teachers bring when they come into
I
Garden
hope they'll
City?
bring an open mind. Now, I would always tell the kids, we would discuss things, and I'd say, what do you think? Sometimes they would say, what do you think? And I'd tell them, but I said, I can't tell you what to think. It's you alone and your business, you know.
So giving people the tools to make up their own mind and
Right.
the freedom to
And I
explore.
don't consider I'm some kind of radical teacher. I just think they ought to have the right to make up their own minds.
And in terms of curriculum, do you have thoughts on what should be taught or things that shouldn't be taught? I mean, there's a lot.
They used to have state tests that were more thinking. Or you'd have to write essays defending a certain point of view. But some parents got upset about all that. So they're getting more into rote memory testing, and that's wrong. If state testing is just memorizing a bunch of answers, I think they should go back more into, I know uh, you've got to allow your kid the right to think, but and they don't have to agree with the teacher. They, I think the old-fashioned state assessments was better than the rote ones that they're doing now. But the rote ones comes with what parents are demanding.
Mm.
So
Do you have any thoughts on information technology, on just how we get our information now that
I
everything's
think
internet and phone based and
um,
news?
I think our news shouldn't be as controlled as it is, and we all know that whether you're a Fox fan or a CNN fan or whatever, you realize that the news is being controlled and controlled by a few billionaires. And I don't like that.
Mhm.
I I don't think any billionaire should be able to control the news.
Mhm. It's hard to teach students, I imagine, to navigate.
And I don't care whether it's a liberal billionaire like Soros or whether it's a billionaire that is very much on the other side.
Mhm.
They just should not be allowed to do that. The news should be kind of free and open.
Yeah.
Without an agenda behind it.
Agreed. Talk a little bit, since retirement, you've gotten involved with the Finney County Historical Society. Tell me a little bit, or maybe you were before you even retired, but about your work there.
Okay. Um, this kind of relates back to Garden City a little bit. I'll do one that relates back a little bit. Um, although you don't have a real good, probably never been to Hayes, but Hayes is up to the northeast, and many of the Volga Germans up there have relatives down here. Just you almost get, I go to the senior center in Hayes, and almost everybody has some kind of a relative down here, if they're Volga German. And I was with a lady yesterday, and she has her son married a Mexican lady down here, and all of her grandkids are down here, and she comes down here and sees them. And you know, she knows about Garden City. Okay, here's a story. The buffalo at Garden City High School, the stone buffalo that's out front, was carved by a famous Kansas sculptor named Pete Felton. He's in his 90s. And in the Ellis County Historical Society, his property adjoins the Historical Society, and he was saying, I want to just give that to the Historical Society, but I got to checking into it, and he hates lawyers. He's never collected Social Security. He's never paid taxes. That's him. He's never anything. He did make the sculptures that are in the Kansas State Capitol, and I think one of his sculptures might even be in Washington, D.C. But he's pretty famous for his sculpture. But anyway, we found out the will hadn't been witnessed, hadn't been anything. So I worked with people, and we now have him with a witnessed well and a power of attorney, and that he's going to leave his stuff to the Historical Society up there. And he's very happy about this. And we did kind of make him happy. He loves cats. And he was needing more money for cat food, seriously. So we bought his old pickup truck that he used to haul stuff around his displays, and we paid him $5,000 for that. And once we did that, he was more than willing to cooperate with us.
Mhm. He had some money for cat food.
Yes, I gave him money for cat food. Yes, it did.
What about the Pioneer of the Year? You had told me you had tried to get minority families
Yes,
represented.
that's true. Uh, I left out that I was Kansas History Teacher of the Year, I think.
Well, that's very important. to
And
record.
that did occur when I was doing History Day. And also when I was on the board up here for the longest time in this county, their Pioneers of the Year were always white. And I said, you guys, what's the population around here? Let's get some pioneers that are Black, African American. We actually had one, I think they honored him. He was still farming at age 90 out on the homestead up northwest of town. And they have gotten many Hispanic families as pioneers because they too are part of the story. I'm not sure they've ever done an Asian person, but they need to consider it eventually. And we have had Mayor of Garden City who's Hispanic. We have a city commissioner now here who's Asian. We've had a Black lady mayor. You know, Garden City's come a long ways.
Mhm. Pretty unique place.
Yes, you would think out here in the middle of nowhere,
Mhm.
which we are, if you look it up, we're the most isolated big city. Well, if you call 25, 30,000.
Big city.
Yeah, most isolated city in the 48 states. We're a good 200 miles from any other big place. Amarillo, Pueblo, Wichita.
Are you glad you've spent your life here?
Yes,
Yeah. Why?
just an interesting place to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like I know so much about the history here too.
And you've ensured that story gets passed on.
Yeah, I knew you heard Caverly say she remembered. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is very corny, but I'll close this with this joke. And I can do others. Oh, here's two jokes I used to tell. And these jokes are remembered over the years. Okay. Did you hear about when this is an old joke, but these are seventh graders, and you even see this on the internet occasionally. Mama Tomato and Daddy Tomato were out walking, and they had Baby Tomato with them. And Baby Tomato just kept fooling around and tagging along behind them. And Daddy Tomato kept telling him to come on, come on. And so finally, Daddy Tomato got really upset. And he went back there and went stomp and said ketchup. That's very corny.
That's very corny.
It's very corny. Yeah. And here's another true story. This kind of fits in with the geography of southwestern Kansas, Texas Panhandle, southeastern Colorado. A mom, it was harvest time, and a mom sent her sons out to pick piñon nuts, harvest them. And they were doing it, and they were doing it, and they were doing it. And they finally got down to the last piñon nut, and they couldn't decide who it should belong to, which bucket it should go in. They got in a big fight. It was a difference of opinion. That's corny too.
Nice clean jokes though.
Yeah. Yeah, they're clean joke, yes.
Yes, they are. So you've lived your life out here. what are your hopes for its future? What are your fears for its future?
We're getting old, of course, but uh, I'm slowing down.
Well, that's for your future. How about Garden City's future?
I think Garden City. I was up north today and saw some of the lots they already have laid out to expand growth.
Mhm.
Uh, in behind where the Church of Christ is, I noticed those streets were open and they had already run the water lines and everything and the electrical lines, and it's like 34 lots ready to sell. Garden City wants to expand.
Are there any issues you think it will face with water or anything that
They do
concerns
have,
you?
Garden City knows that the Ogallala will go down. Um, they have wells down in the Dakota aquifer, which is underneath the Ogallala, and they have a water softening plant out west of town. The Dakota is very hard water, but I think Garden City has figured out if the Ogallala goes down, we'll go into the Dakota.
Hmm.
The people in Hayes who have no good water source keep saying Hayes is going to go down when they run out of water. I mean, excuse me, Garden City is going to go down when they run out of water. Hayes says we aren't because we've learned how to conserve. Like Hayes has got their water conservation down, so they're using about half the water they used to. And they're serious about it. And Hayes has bought a bunch of land down along the Arkansas River, and they're trying to run a pipeline up to Hayes and Russell and Victoria. But the farmers are fighting it like crazy. Because you know who uses all the irrigation water? Farmers. Like if Hayes would get that water, they'd use about half of what a farmer would. But there's been lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. And I think Hayes eventually will get a better source of water, but right now up there, they're hurting badly.
Mhm. So water is an issue.
Water is an issue in Garden. It's an issue in Hayes. You know what they call this place? Maybe they were right. Great American Desert.
Are there any other stories you want to make sure you fit into our interview about the history or about your own path as a teacher?
That's probably enough. I probably sounded too much like a teacher. And if anybody's offended by what I say, they're entitled to their own opinions.
That's right.
I will tell you something about my local church. I won't name names. I go to the Methodist in Hayes too, but the church here split just about down the middle over gay marriage and all, and it was just a few votes. And the people who believed in being somewhat more liberal, won by just a handful of votes, and they kept the church building. But most of the money went with the other people. They even flew in. They flew in a bishop from Texas on jet airplanes to try to get him to sway them to go to the global church, which was more conservative. And they had big meals out at the financed by some of these money people out at the uh, I want to call it by its old name, but I better call it by its new name. Out there at the Carry On.
So there's
But I had people on the internet saying, how can you like those people on the other side? And the people on the other side did form a church, and it's called Grace Global Church, and it meets in the Presbyterian Building in Fellowship Hall, and they have over 190 to 100 people every Sunday. And I told this lady, I said, God alone judges. I don't. I said, I can be friends with them if I want to. That doesn't mean I have to agree with them. We just have to agree to disagree. Uh, I'm not God. I'm not going to judge that they're going to hell. They'll have to deal with God over whatever their opinion is. He is the final judge in the speech.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's a lovely sentiment and would probably heal a lot of the divisions in our country if people just agreed to disagree
Yeah.
and be tolerant.
And one of the guys I'm going to go visit in the morning, he goes up to the global church. But I've told him, I said, you and I just disagree.
Mm.
But I said, you're welcome to your thoughts. I'm welcome to mine. We can still be friends,
God gave us a free will.
Yes.
Well, and I think we've done a great job. You've done a wonderful introduction for us to Garden City history. And if there's anything else you'd like to share in closing, feel free. Otherwise, we can
Well, thank you for doing this.
call it.
Thank you for being understanding. I'm happy to have had the opportunity. And I say it again, if you disagree with me, fine. I'm not judging you. Hope you don't judge me.
Thank you, Norman.
Mm.
It was a pleasure to interview you.
Thank you.